I think many of you know who these people are, but we'll do a brief intro. I could introduce you by name or I could introduce you by business model. Advertising, free content, expensive content plus advertising, expensive content, no advertising. Did I get it right?
Sure.
Jessica, Dan, John, thanks for coming. So again, that's really the broad theme I want to talk about here. You guys have very different approaches to reaching a business audience. So I briefly want to have you sort of explain why you've taken the path you're taking. So Jessica, let's start with you. You used to do what I did for a living. You smartened up. You got out of working journalist and became a CEO. But then you said, beyond that, I want to avoid ads altogether. So explain what the information is, how much you charge for it, why you're doing that.
Sure. So when I left the Wall Street Journal after 8 years as a tech reporter, I wanted to build the next Wall Street Journal with a much more efficient business model and around technology. And so the subscription, I thought, what is the ultimate business model? It's having a differentiated product with great news that other people don't have. It's having an audience that you're very focused on reaching. You're not trying to be all things to all people. And an alignment where your business scales in proportion to delivering value to that audience. And that's a pure and simple subscription business.
But everyone knows media doesn't work unless you reach massive scale and you get on Facebook.
I mean, sure, I think the conventional wisdom around that is wrong. I think the most scalable model is to deliver value and to have a brand that people are willing to seek out and not just sort of graze upon through social media. So we're taking a very long-term view. We are small but focused, have insanely loyal, very high quality subscribers that continue to grow very, very, very steadily. And so it's a different model, but I came at it, to answer your question, from thinking, what's the ideal? Now, sure, it's hard. I mean, it's tough as hell because you have to have information other people don't have, but we're journalists. We think we can train the best journalists. We think we have the best team of journalists. So that's what we're doing.
So you're charging how much for a subscription?
So we're $400 a year.
And how many subscriptions have you sold?
Many.
Come on.
So no, we have thousands of subscribers. Business Insider guessed 2,000, and I said many multiples of that. So I'm sticking to that. And we're cash flow positive. We're trying not to be. I want to be investing in the business and growing much faster, so we will not be operating at that level, but that's where we are today, and we think it's just the beginning.
Okay, we'll come back. Dan?
Yes.
I just gave you some free content last weekend. I
Yes.
gave you some content. You gave me what in return? We published some stuff on LinkedIn.
Well, I gave you one thing. I'll challenge the assertion that this is a advertising game for us. Advertising is a part of it, but really, if you think about what content is for on LinkedIn, it's an engagement part of the business. And if we get people on LinkedIn writing, sharing, connecting with people, they come back tomorrow, they come back throughout the day, and recruiters can then see who they are, and people will buy advertising against it. There are a number of different business models on LinkedIn where content is the glue that keeps them all going.
But you don't charge anyone to read it?
No, absolutely. It's out free. Anyone can read it. You don't have to be a subscriber or a member of LinkedIn to read it. It's all out there.
And you're not paying me to give you free content or any of your users to give you?
No. We give you back a lot of eyeballs on your content. We give you stats on who's looking at them. So when you wrote, you could see that that 20% of your readers were in the tech industry, that 80% of them were, I'm guessing, I can't actually see your stats, but 80% of them were in New York. And how many were senior leaders? How many were just starting their jobs? So you have people like the CEO of the Mayo Clinic, when he comes on to write, all he wants to do is reach healthcare professionals. So he'll write a post that'll get 500,000 views, and he can look at his stats and say, oh, I actually didn't reach anyone in healthcare. I got a lot of views, but this was a failure for me. And he goes and tries to recalibrate his posts.
John, you're somewhere in the middle here?
So we've completely and deliberately changed the business model in the sense that we used to be advertising dominated. Now most of our revenues come from journalism, from content. But I don't think it's an either or. It's two sides of the same coin. So the more high quality, highly engaged readers we get, the more valuable the advertising proposition is, and particularly with subscriptions. The data that you get in terms of being able to understand, articulate, project, and sell that audience becomes much more valuable to advertisers. And alongside that, we've got a physical events business like this. So it's a multi-platform, multi-channel business model, all based around those sort of premium content and a very strong newsroom.
What prompted that shift?
Well, advertising,
more of a subscription model.
I mean, advertising is a fickle friend, and once you've been through a couple of financial crises and seen advertising literally stop, you kind of think that's no way to live. You need a much more sustainable, viable business base. And I think more generally, when you look at what's gone on in terms of the ecosystem and the major social media tech platforms, we took a view early on, it's going to be seriously hard to compete with those guys in terms of scale. And we were early to charge, and I remember coming out to the West Coast and being told I just didn't get it, and the internet wanted to be free. It didn't make sense. But when you look at what's happening now, and you look in our backyard, you look at The Guardian, which I think has done a brilliant job in many respects with journalism. They're having to take a lot of cost out because competing on scale is really hard when you're up against tech and social media giants, and it's you're not going to win.
Yeah, The Guardian essentially said this whole digital move, which we were out in front of, turns out to cost us a lot of money, and we're not seeing any return on it. We've got a real problem. How many subscribers does the FT have?
So now we have 780,000 paid-for readers, which is the highest we've had in our history, which is 128 years. So a lot.
So that has ramped up, and they're paying roughly how much per year?
So premium sub is cheap, $500, and standard sub's about $380, $400.
So you've got a version of Jessica's business, but much bigger, plus advertising.
Yeah.
Why not just go all the way in and say, look, you're already paying us $400 or $500 a year. Let's make it $600 and just strip out ads altogether.
One, because we actually make a lot of money from advertising. Two is, we like ads, and a lot of our readers like ads. I mean, we'll maybe talk about ad blocking later, but there are ads and there are ads, and I think really well done, really beautifully designed ads. We have a big luxury business, supplement business, they're great ads. So, we've surveyed our readers, and they're pretty happy with our ads.
Let's talk a bit more about your business. You have a new owner.
Yeah.
I think this is your first appearance on stage since Nikkei purchased you guys last year.
Yes, I've been in deep deal dive for the past 6 months. I'm out. This is my coming out after the deal.
So what's it like with the new bosses?
It's really good. So we've got this new business model and a new strategy. What we didn't have was funding. We didn't have long-term investment because our previous owners were really prioritizing education. So the
previous owner was Pearson.
Yeah.
Best known for
Education
textbooks
business.
at school.
So Nikkei is all about news. They believe strongly, like us, that great journalism can be a great business. They like our global growth strategy. They're investing in us. They're investing in product, in reach, in video, in product, new technology, in data analytics. Very interested in data analytics. So we're feeling pretty good. I think the one thing that surprised me positively was, well, I suppose one of the questions I had and one of the concerns I had was, the perception of Japanese business can be that they're quite slow and quite bureaucratic. This is not the case at all. When you saw how with Nikkei, when you saw how they behaved during the transaction, they were pretty decisive and came in hard and fast and big, which was great. And since then, I've really seen that they are very willing and able to make fast decisions. And I think in our industry right now, speed is essential. So the ability to act fast, and I think that relates to the other dimension, is this sense of trust in business and relationships. If you're in the zone of trust with a Japanese business, as we are and their partners are, you can make big decisions very quickly.
So I know it's early, but can you give an example of something that you weren't able to do under the old owners that you're doing now?
Well, I think the single biggest thing is invest long-term in the business. The problem with being in a public company is it's all about quarterly reports. It's all about cost discipline. Don't get me wrong, I believe in cost discipline a lot, but it's being able to make those long-term investments.
So what's a long-term investment that you're making today?
Well, we've got a 5-year business plan, which has been signed and sealed, and providing we hit the numbers, it's fine.
Everyone normally says video. Is that core for you guys?
It's becoming more core because, number one, it works really well on mobile. Mobile's now half our traffic. The engagement we get with video and mobile is really high. Number two, it gets around that cannibalization risk because our video is free. So it's a really good way of reaching new readers and drives the growth strategy. And I think thirdly, it opens up new demographics. If you look at our reader cohorts, the print, which is profitable, doing well, tends to be 50 plus. The sort of website more generally, 40 plus. Social media, 30 plus. We think video is going to be very useful for us in kind of reaching 30 and below.
You made a veiled reference to this. Everyone, including your reporters, thought this summer you were going to be sold to Axel Springer. Instead, last minute, Nikkei came and bought you guys. Yeah. What was that whiplash like internally, where you thought you were going to have one set of owners and now you have a different set of owners?
Well, I mean, necessarily, it was a very small group of people involved in the deal. And frankly, it was amazing how it was kept confidential for so long because we did a lot of very careful work on all of this. I think now people look at the investment strategy, the backing, and just this morning, actually, we've announced with Nikkei, we've got a great new headquarters that they've enabled us to find. We probably would have had to move out of London without them. So I think there's a really positive feeling actually around Nikkei, and the fact that it's private and long-term is a big deal.
Dan, why, you've been at LinkedIn for how long now?
4.5 years.
You came out of Fortune. You were one of us. You were a writer and
Absolutely.
editor. What was the pitch that got you there? Because your job didn't exist when you came out, right? Yeah.
So content didn't really exist on LinkedIn at this point. We were just
You went at
launching.
LinkedIn to look up where someone was working or was looking for work.
Exactly, and I used it as a reporter to find ex-employees, single best way to find ex-employees for stories. And at the time I was the editor of Fortune.com, we were building an app that used LinkedIn APIs, and I'd gone out to Mountain View to talk to the folks there. And I was approached soon after that by the CEO, who explained that he wanted to bring LinkedIn into content, that the idea of giving professionals what they need every day to make them better at what they do makes a lot of sense on LinkedIn. And at the time, I was at Fortune struggling with the question of there were a lot of discussions about how we had to make the site better. A lot of my day was spent not working on articles, but working with the engineers to try to convince them to build things that we needed to just stay competitive. And I also was seeing that much more of my day was spent pitching stories to other places to host and to bring eyeballs in. And it seemed to me that that the bet I was making was that a media company could become a tech company, and that the opposite might be a better bet. That a tech company figuring out the media game would be interesting, I would learn a lot, and I've spent my entire career at business magazines. Business newspaper. We were at Forbes together in the early days, fact-checking. Started a magazine called Portfolio at Condé Nast. I've always been about business journalism. And the idea of being able to create content and to put it in front of professionals where they were every day throughout the day seemed really attractive.
I don't know if you saw Joanna Coles yesterday. She said, the tech companies all say they are interested in content, but they're not interested in content. They're not fundamentally interested in content.
Right.
I remember talking with you sort of early on in your tenure, and I think you probably would have reached the same conclusion. It was an engineering-driven company. I think still is today. How did you learn how to speak their language or vice versa?
That's a great question. First of all, it helps me a lot that the CEO is a incredible mixture of content-driven and tech-driven. And Jeff Weiner's background is in content and is at media companies. And he is tech CEO through and through, but he understands it, and that helped me a lot in the early days. But there were a lot, I covered tech. I thought I really understood technology. And then I started at LinkedIn, and the learning curve was massive. It was massive to the point where I would have conversations with data scientists about what kind of content we should be putting in front of which professionals. And I would say, this article is amazing. This is the one we've got to get out. This one's got to be put in front of a lot of people. And they would say, all right, why is that one good? I'm like, read it. You can tell. Look how great it is. Like, yeah, but what about it? What makes you say that? I can't tell it's great. You're like, it's a great story. And so then you learn you have to start talking this language. Well, maybe these are the signals we can use to determine if it's good. Maybe it's not. And it was we have a belief internally, and it's taken a while for everyone to all rally around this idea, but that if you combine editors and algorithms, you come up with something really powerful. And
Which one wins if there's a fight?
Well, it depends. They do two different things. So the editors can vary. I've got a team of about 20 editors around the world. The editors are excellent at doing the very head of the content. What are the big stories, what's breaking, what is not trending yet but is going to be trending? How can you tell if something's a gem if you get in front of the right people?
Using their eyes and their ears and
exactly,
their brain and their gut.
Intuition, but the algorithms do a much better job on the long tail. We can't ever figure out what are the right stories for, I'm not gonna, if I hired an editor who was an expert in medical devices and could pick the right stories for people who are in the medical device industry, we'd probably do really well in that area. But that's an incredibly expensive proposition of covering the world with that. You let the algorithms do it, you start training, and everything we do helps train the algorithms, which is both terrifying and also the future and incredibly important to understand. And you hope that they take over more and more of the curation work, and you keep moving up the ladder and doing more of the creation and cultivation work.
See, I thought when you said long tail, you were going to mean like stuff that was less valuable, we can let the computers figure out. It seems to me like what you're really saying is we can't afford to hire medical device guys, so we'll let the computer take care of that.
I'll give you another example. There was a post that did really well in people in the wine and spirits industry. This is about a year and a half ago. We're reading the story about in China, they were taking old bottles of wine and actually putting new wine into it so that they could evade taxes. This was a small story written in a wine trade magazine that none of my editors would have ever seen, and we wouldn't have hired a wine and spirits editor. You're right, that's not the economics of it doesn't make sense. But you can see that article does well, and what the editors can do is say, this is a great article, I'm gonna put it in front of everyone, because yes, it's doing well in this small niche, but it's something that I think everyone will do well with. So you try to give it a much bigger audience.
So Jessica, but this is for all of you guys, but particularly for you, right? You have thousands of subscribers, you want more. The media and tech industry is increasingly moving to a world where Facebook, Instant, Snapchat, there's a lot of big tech platforms that would like you to give it content for free. And
Dan emails me
Dan
once
has one
a
of
month
them.
asking for
Dan wants your free content,
Right.
and they're offering you a share of revenue, or Dan's
they're
going to
offering
get
us
you
money.
eyeballs.
Yeah.
So you've got a model that says it only works if someone pays. But how are all of you guys interacting with this distributed content world, which was a scary novelty a year ago and now is sort of standard? We just hired a director of platforms. All of us now are saying, well, of course we're going to distribute on Apple News, Facebook Instant, Snapchat,
But why,
Discover.
right?
But we don't exactly know how we're going to make our money yet, but we'll figure it out. It's definitely going that way. So do you feel like you have to participate in that in some form?
Well, so any media company, news, anything else, needs to have a loyal audience they have a value proposition for. The media industry doesn't have a business model problem, it has a value proposition problem, right? We've been talking about content like it's all the same, right? But what we write is very different from what Dan's teams are generating, and maybe more similar to the FT, hopefully. But so I think the question, that's really important to figure out. So if you don't have an audience that's going to come to you, game over. It doesn't matter if today you have the best team for Twitter, Facebook, Snapchat, Oculus, messaging. Get ready for messaging, everyone. We're going to be building bot apps for publishers, right? And so that, I believe, is what you have to do first and foremost. If you have that, these platforms are great tools to helping grow your audience. You have a funnel, you can build awareness, and so we do use them for that. But I think we're
But you're not giving Dan enough free content for LinkedIn.
Well, the way I've always approached it is if we can understand what drives the numbers we care about, which are subscribers, we'll be aggressive and opportunistic in growing that number. And so we've tried a couple partnerships. We've done something with Crunchbase. We're open to many others, but we're really disciplined. Is it helping our goal? Yes, invest more. If not, don't worry about being a name on a press release that some tech company wants to make with a bunch of big media brands. I don't think the media industry should be playing that game.
Yeah, I think it's very healthy and very exciting. It's healthy because to get it right, and I think this is absolutely the big issue of the moment, and I think a lot of traditional media are kind of really anxious about distributed content. What does it mean? Does it mean disintermediation? I'm actually quite positive and excited about it. It forces you to be very clear about what your comparative advantage is, what makes you special and different. If you're confident about that, then the question is, how do you use these platforms and channels to really multiply up your impact? And you know, it's hard, but it's not impossible, and you can see that it works. And when it works well, it's very dynamic. So we are free. We're playing with all these channels, experimenting. We're going to be on AMP, in the vanguard of AMP, Instant Articles, etc. And we're putting free stuff out there because it's probably one of the most potentially powerful ways of building reach and marketing.
And then you said specifically video we think is going to be a free
Yeah,
product.
video is free, so it's different. So it's either selected articles or it's different formats. But you look at the power of that. So last week we had an exclusive from Bloomberg about his presidential.
It's very odd that
thinking.
Michael Bloomberg announced in the FT
I
that he was
think it makes
considering a U.S. presidential
perfect
run.
sense to me, actually.
I think you would American
I think he was making a point. We're glad he did to us. But you know, the traffic and the reach we got off-site was 10x what we got on-site. And if you think about what that does in terms of introducing the FT brand and content to people we weren't reaching before. So I completely agree, you have to be very close to your loyal readers. You have to have a lockhold on them. But I think, you know, there used to be this idea that sort of splendid isolation. I think isolation is stupid. I think that actually you have to be on these platforms, and you have to think about how they can really ramp up your reach.
A few years ago, you had a very prominent platform fight with Apple. It was back when the iPad had been introduced, and there was a big push towards iPad tablet editions, and there was a whole back and forth with Apple and the publishers about subscriptions. And everyone eventually said, all right, we're going to work with Apple under the terms that Apple wants. And you guys were this rare exception. You said, we're going to take our stuff out of iTunes. We're just going to be a web app. What did you learn from that experience, sort of going toe-to-toe with Apple and deciding to go your own way?
So number one, we do have some stuff in iTunes. Number two, we're not religious about that. And
But at the time, you said everyone's going this way. We are going to go off on our own. At the time, it seemed like Apple seemed like it was going to have a much bigger influence in the media world than it turned out to have.
And we are on Apple News now. I think what we learned that we two core principles that we'll always stick to. One is that direct relationship with the reader is absolutely fundamental. We will never be disintermediated from our readers. It's just too important in terms of their behavior, the data, everything. And that was at risk. And second, and probably less important, was the pricing dimension. That wasn't the primary thing. It was more the direct relationship with the reader. And we still feel very strongly about that. And so I think one of the things we factor in when we're talking to Google, Apple, Facebook, et cetera, is what's the data? What's the relationship that we have? And we make decisions influenced by that.
Dan, I can't. Jump in.
I wanted to jump in on the distributed question. I think there's two examples that I would point to as the power of using a distributed model for media companies. One is recently Lena Dunham just started writing on LinkedIn. For her Lenny letter, she needs to get subscribers for it and to grow it quickly. And for her, writing an essay on LinkedIn about work-related issues, professional-related issues, and then pushing people to subscribe to Lenny makes total sense.
Do you guys reach out to her? Does someone?
We reached out to her, yeah, and then sat down. She did an interview. I did a one-on-one interview with her. We talked about it. Now she's regularly writing and sharing on LinkedIn. It's great to
explain what LinkedIn was to her?
Oh, she's a hardcore LinkedIn every day. Yeah, no, she pretended to know. I'm sure she has people who do it for her. But the amount of interaction she got beneath her article, people saying, I love what you're doing. I'm going to subscribe to Lenny Letter. To her, that was a great. She has to build. It wasn't just marketing because she can't just say subscribe. She has to put herself out there and write about it. Another example is we're hearing constantly and work very closely with book publishers to use LinkedIn as what used to be, second serial. It used to be that when you were a publisher, you would try to sell serial rights to a magazine and you would get the first essay out. Now they come to LinkedIn for business books. You publish an original essay or maybe an excerpted essay on LinkedIn, and what we hear anecdotally every time is that it turns a book from a Amazon kind of mid-level to one of the best sellers in business books. So there's this power in using content and getting it in front of people, and of then trying to steer the eyeballs to where you want them to go afterwards or in the middle of the piece, and it works.
So I can't let you get off stage without asking about this. Up until recently, LinkedIn was one of the rare recent batch of tech companies that had a successful IPO and kept going. Last I looked, you guys were down 55% this year. I think you lost 40% in a day.
Are you serious? I got to check this out.
That's what I read. I know Jeff had a post about it. What is it like? Again, that whiplash question internally to sort of go through that in a day, in a week.
Right.
I'm assuming most people you work with have never experienced a downturn.
Most of the people I work with came from traditional media and have only lived in downturns. So for my team, it was not a massive. It was sort of like, oh yeah, this seems normal. But for the company, it was. Jeff did a incredible job of explaining, and other leaders at the company of saying, we're the same company we were yesterday. The market does what the market does, and we feel really good about where the company's going. I have, looking at our roadmap, I am incredibly excited about the company in general, but especially with content, and I can't control
Dark night of the soul, though, don't you have to think that look, it's a tech company first and foremost, it's a jobs board first and foremost, what we do is important, but it's not the core of what they do. If things go south, don't you feel that at some point you get closer and closer to the edge of the gangplank?
Have you been talking to my therapist? No, this is I think that there is content is core to LinkedIn at this point. we are 5 years into it. It is built in throughout everything that everything that you go on. When you're on the site, you will see posts and shared articles and encouragement to share yourself and to write throughout everything, and that's just going to keep growing. And when you hear from people, there was a guy who recently wrote, he was a Berkeley undergrad. He wrote a series of posts about marketing. He's a marketing undergrad, and he wrote this great piece about why Race Together was a failure for Starbucks. And his posts were picked up everywhere. He was offered a job at Apple in marketing because, and the recruiter said, we loved your posts, we love what you're writing, we like how you think, and so we wanted to hire you. And so the idea that you can go back to just being a place for CVs and to say, here's who I am, a static example of everything I've ever done doesn't work. It doesn't work for students. It doesn't work when you're changing your jobs all the time. But explaining how you think is really important for being hired. And so I don't see content ever going away. And I think that the need for the editor and algorithmic mix we know works. And so I'm very confident that will be a long-term future of LinkedIn.
Jessica, there was a joke at your expense, very polite joke, in the College Humor video yesterday. But everyone's brought it up, and John has the same issue, right? So you break news that's literally news no one has, and Business Insider or anyone who can type can repost that news within minutes. There's a competition to see how fast they can post it. So whatever advantage you've provided to your subscriber for $400 a year is gone in a minute, 2 minutes, 10 minutes. And it's happened with you guys many times. You break an Apple scoop. Everyone's very excited, and then the people who are reading about whatever news you've broken on Apple's car plans aren't reading it on the FT. How do you grapple with that?
Well, let's be clear. Business Insider will post the part of our story that they think will generate the most clicks for Business Insider, which is not the value of an information story, right? I mean, today we published investor estimates of revenue growth, like people who are investors in Didi and Uber and Palantir, what they're forecasting for the businesses of these companies, right? I mean, that is an insanely valuable story for people who care about private tech markets. And yesterday, Yahoo financials, that sort of stuff. So Business Insider will take for their audience what they think is a nice snippet to get traffic. And there are readers who, for that's going to be enough. And I think
there's an old model of newswires, right? Still exists for Reuters and Bloomberg, where that is literally the entire value is speed, getting this a couple seconds before somebody else. There's people who pay a lot of money to learn something a few seconds before someone else.
Right, but again, they're not learning the same thing our subscribers are learning. They're not hearing it from the reporters in the trenches. They're not part of our community. They're not commenting. They're not on our Slack team. Community is a big part of what we do as well.
You've got to be smart about the packaging and the value chain, and you can turn it around and use them. They can help get the audience, but if you've already thought through what the second, third, and fourth story is, what the video that goes with it, what the stats, what the analysis, what the data visualization is, you suddenly have this sort of huge kind of convoy of content, so they can feed people into that. But it does mean that the newsroom and the news editors have a much different and more difficult job. It's not just about the story, it's about the packaging, the timing, the presentation, the tactics, the strategy, and that takes
it sounds relatively easy, as you're saying it on stage. I know that your writers aren't so sanguine about it. There was one of them was tweeting the other day because Michael Wolff from USA Today was riffing on a FT scoop, and the story was, we'll read about it in the FT instead of the USA Today. And to a regular reader, they don't even understand that concept, right? They're just going to go wherever the link is. And so what do you tell? This was Matt Garahan in this case, but what do you tell your employees about that?
I'm sure Matt had a point. But then it is like you have the second and third impact articles. So there's a sort of package, you get stuff from the archive, so you've thought through where you go beyond the immediate story. And it's, you can't avoid people taking your news and riffing with it. And frankly, providing you've thought it through, thought the branding through, thought the packaging through, you can use it to your advantage. But it does require a lot of thought.
And I'll say, we look at it very closely, right? And right now, I think it helps us more than it hurts us. Our growth rate is accelerating, and it's basically all organic at this point. We haven't even really thought through things like marketing yet. That we're just at that phase now, and we we'll pay attention to it.
We get drudged and stuff. We get a nice peak in traffic. It's good.
I know you're not going to have a Snapchat Discover channel for reasons we've discussed. The Wall Street Journal has one. Mm-hmm. Does that interest you at all?
Yeah, it's not at the top of our priority list, but we're pretty open-minded about this stuff. We've just got other things to get through first.
Dan, probably no Snapchat for you guys anytime soon.
Hey, I'm happy to do it. Yeah, I'll put our content anywhere. That makes total sense to me.
All right, we'll tell Evan.
All right.
Let's open up the audience here. And if you've got questions for three very smart people, Don't be shy. Or slow.
Or both.
I'm Chris. I'm from the Weather Channel. I'm curious about personalization. So, Dan, you mentioned that there's a strong role for it in curation, and I'm wondering for a publication like the Financial Times or the New York Times or someone trying to do a comprehensive view of the news, is there a role of algorithms and personalization in deciding what's the most important news of the day or in sourcing that news? Like, how do you think, John, about personalization and algorithms?
Yeah, so we think a lot, and we think it's really important, and it's all part of at the heart of what we're trying to do at the moment is to build engagement and habit. So obviously what's changed big time over recent years is people used to have like one newspaper or two, and now it's all exploded, and people go everywhere for their content. We've got to recreate that habit. One of the best ways of recreating that habit is personalization, making it very relevant. And there's lots of ways you can do that. You can understand, you can look through the data at their usage patterns, you can recommend articles, you can get gift articles, you can get friends or colleagues or people in the industry to recommend articles. It's a big theme of our website redesign, which is ongoing in alpha, coming to beta soon, which is really about personalization and engagement. So it's central. It's quite interesting picking up on what Dan was saying earlier about the algorithm versus editor. So, you know, we do think that there's a big role for data and algorithms, but ultimately the editor will always win, and rightly so at the FT, because that's what people are kind of paying for, is that experience judgment. But the combination is key. So that's also part of the personalization approach.
Question here.
Hi, I'm Nina. It's such an interesting panel with so many great thoughts about distributed media on different platforms. Thank you. Jessica, I used to be an internet equity research analyst at JP Morgan, and while I understood the closed walled garden model around kind of that data and information set, I never really believed in it. And as that market has sort of begun to contract, what you're doing I find really interesting and kind of adding a lot of value. Do you plan to go after also the institutional market? Because I feel like the stuff that you're writing is really valuable to them and is something that they haven't done quite as good a job of covering.
Thank you for saying that. So I think there's a sweet spot between traditional equity research and what we kind of think of as reporting, right? If you can bring data, ideally exclusive data, and a framework for understanding a company, and also be able to tell you, here's what's going on with their sales team, this person's leaving, kind of marry that on-the-ground reporting. To me, that's one of a sort of perfect information story. I mean, there are a couple types of stories, but we love that.
Agree.
And our team gets very excited about that. We hire reporters who get very excited about those stories. So we're definitely doing that. I think we can do it more consistently and make our subscribers just more like a mini franchise within the information subscription around it.
Agree.
And we have our subscribers, we are drawing big subscribers from these communities and as well in finance.
Do you ever think about adding a premium tier?
Yeah.
When I was started working with Henry Blodgett, it's what was then Silicon Valley Insider, it's pre-Lehman. We said, we can just charge hedge funds thousands of dollars. Doesn't mean anything to them.
You know, I don't think that's going to help us get to FT or Wall Street Journal scale, which is ultimately what we want to be. I mean, we're very opportunistic. We want to win in this demo at this price point, and then we're going to look at the next one and come up with the next model. So I'm sure we will have tiers and all of that over time, but not in the foreseeable future. We want to grow this audience.
Corey.
Hi, Corey Hike at Mike. Great discussion. So I'm seeing a little bit of a sort of bifurcation here. So one side of it is premium content, really deep reporting, direct to consumer, subscriber-driven business, which is one that I think makes a lot of sense, and I think it's great. The other side of it, and Dan, your comments were really interesting, going to LinkedIn and really getting the insights around delivering content in a more sort of algorithmic, like programmatic, like based on like robots, right, and what they actually see and know people are reading, and like so that's one way to go. The Facebook world, where you're delivering by way of like programmatic insights, and you're sort of hitting that, and then maybe content is actually created around that as well, and then this subscriber side of things, which is more high fidelity and like deep reporting. Where does that leave everyone else in the middle? Publishers.
I think it is I think that if you're counting on if you're a publisher who thinks that you can just generate a lot of content and do well, it's a very tough world to be in. Especially because if I think about what you're talking about with LinkedIn is the algorithms are for distribution, but the algorithms aren't creating content. What we have is 400 million experts in their particular fields who can write really interesting pieces about what they're seeing every day.
Do you ever use those insights to drive what you're creating? We
use the insights to help generate more content, absolutely. So we can see that something like this is about a year ago now, we noticed a spike in stories about why it's time to quit. And the economy was doing a little bit better, and people were saying, all right, now's the time, I'm actually out of this job. And so as an editor, we said, this is great, these people actually are trying to quit right now. So we started asking some of the experts, you should be quitting, or even a better example is this morning I noticed there are a lot of articles being written about why Apple should be, has to work with the FBI, or shouldn't work with the FBI in cracking the iPhone. So we'll do two things. Number one, we'll put writing prompts in front of people who are experts in security or who work at Apple or who have been at the FBI, because we know their full backgrounds, and we can say, you are an expert in this area, you have worked in these companies, or you follow them, why don't you write about your insights about why this works and why it doesn't work? And so you'll end up with 800 stories, let's say, about the iPhone and the FBI case. 20 of them will be okay, 10 will be amazing, and when you have a big funnel like we have at LinkedIn, that system works. But if you're a publisher trying to just generate a lot of content to try to get even more eyeballs, I think it's a difficult position to be in, and being premium seems to make a lot more sense in that world.
Jessica, I think I know your answer about if it's a good place if the middle is a good place to be.
Never want to be in the
Never
middle.
want to be in the middle.
On anything.
John, we will give you the last word.
I think it depends. I mean, an algorithm and data is never going to break a really major scoop. You've got to have that. Equally, we use data and algorithms to reinforce the relevance of what's happening and to actually change the mindset of the newsroom in terms of thinking about relevance and engagement. So I think you've just got to understand where the data and the algorithms fit across the news spectrum.
Thanks, Saul. I would like to continue this conversation, but we are out of time, and the algorithm says we got to bring on new content. Thank you.